Hi friends. Today you'll be reading the story Lunch Money. So if you want to hear the story in its entirety, you need to go to your Clever app, then click Think Central. I've put the icons at the top so you know what they look like. Then when you get to Think Central, you're going to need to search for the book Lunch Money. You should be able to listen and read the whole story once you get there. Then you can continue on with the lessons that you see in this PowerPoint. So this week in reading, you'll describe how a narrator's or speaker's point of view influences how events are described. Describe means if you describe a person, object, event, or situation, you say what they are like or what happened. So you're going to be describing the narrator's perspective and what happened, right, from their perspective. A narrator is a person who tells a story or gives an account of something. So you need to be thinking about who is telling the story and how they're telling the story. You'll also need to keep in mind the point of view of the character. You can refer to the opinions or attitudes that you have about something as your point of view. So what is the narrator's opinion of events that happen? What are their attitudes about what happened? All of those things influence the events in the story and how they're told. Influence means the power to make other people agree with your opinion or what you want. What is it that the narrator wants in the story? What is their opinion? Do you agree with their opinion? This is what we'll do as we read the story Lunch Money. So another one of our purposes for reading today is going to be to learn that with hard work and determination, you can accomplish your goals. Think about where this is found in the text that we're reading today. Standing in the cafeteria line, Greg opened his red plastic pencil case. He counted once, and then he counted again, just to be sure. Then he grinned. There were 13 left. Sweet, that means I sold 17 units. That's what Greg called the comic books he'd been selling, units. And selling 17 units before lunch was a new sales record. Greg's comic books weren't the kind of for sale at stores. Regular comic books were sort of tall, also a little floppy, not Greg's. Greg's comic books were about the size of a credit card, and they could stand up on one end all by themselves. They were only 16 pages long, and he could fit about 50 of them into his pencil case. These comic books were short and sturdy, and that's why they were called chunky comics. So now you will need to open up your Word document. You will type the answer to this question right below where you see number 1 in the question. What is Greg's point of view of his comics? What is his attitude about other comics? Greg loved that name. He had chosen it himself. He got to pick the name because he was the author of all the chunky comic stories. He had drawn all the pictures too, and he was also the designer, the printer, and the binder. Plus, he was the marketing manager, the advertising director, and the entire sales force. Chunky Comics was a one-kid operation, and that one kid was Greg Kenton. Greg snapped the pencil case shut and grabbed a tray. He took a grilled cheese sandwich, a cup of carrot sticks, and then looked over the fruit cocktail bowls until he found one with 3 chunks of cherry. He got a chocolate milk from the cooler, and as he walked toward his seat, Greg did some mental math. So, when I read this part of the story, I figured out that this story is told in third person, and I know this because the narrator is not a character directly in the action of the story. Um, the words in the text use he, she, and they, and that is indicative of a third person story. If it was first person and Greg was telling the story, then it would have I, me, or we in the story, and it says Greg loved that name, not I love that name. It says he had chosen it for himself, not I had chosen it for myself. So this is told in the third person. A narrator outside of the story is telling the story. And then I noticed Greg's attitude about his business of selling these comics. It seems very self-centered because he is the one in charge of marketing, he is the one in charge of directing, and he's in charge of the sales force. That seems like somebody who has a very self-centered attitude. Monday, the first day Chunky Comics had gone on sale, he had sold 12 units. Tuesday, 15 units. Wednesday, 18 units. And today, Thursday, he had already sold 17 units before lunch. So that was 62 units, since Monday morning, and each little book sold for 25 cents, so the up-to-the-minute sales total was for September 12th was $15.50. Greg knew why sales were increasing: word of mouth. Kids had been telling other kids about his comic book. The cover illustration was powerful, the inside pictures were strong, and the story was loaded with action. The title was Crayon, Return of the Hunter, and it was Volume 1, Number 1, the very first of the Chunky comics, so that made it a collector's item. Greg sat down at his lunch table next to Ted Kendall. Ted nodded and said, "Hi," but Greg didn't hear him. Greg picked up his sandwich and took a big bite. He chewed the warm bread and the soft cheese, but he didn't taste a thing. Greg was still thinking about sales. 15.50 in 3.5 days. Not so hot. Greg had set a sales goal for the first week, $25, which meant that he had to sell 100 units. It looked like he was going to fall short. Number 2. Type your answer underneath it. What is Greg's attitude about his comics? Does the narrator know Greg's thoughts and feelings? How do you know? The idea of making and selling comic books had hit Greg like a crank over the head from Superman himself. It made perfect sense. Candy and gum were against school rules, and tiny toys were boring and also against the rules. But how could he go wrong selling little books? School was all about books and reading. True, reading a comic book wasn't exactly the same as reading a regular book, but still, there was a rack of comics right in the kids section at the public library downtown, and some new graphic novels, too. Comic books had been part of Greg's life forever, mostly because of his dad's collection. His dad's collection filled 3 shelves in the family room, and it was worth over $10,000. Once Greg had shown he knew how to take care of the comic books, he had been allowed to read and look at them all he wanted. Greg had even bought a few collectible comics of his own, mostly newer ones that weren't very expensive. So now on number 3, I want to know, does the narrator know Greg's thoughts and feelings, and how do you know? You will need to go back through these pages 44 through 46, to give me evidence of how you know that the narrator knows Greg's thoughts and feelings.